Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear listeners. I'm very excited today to be bringing you a podcast in a very different format this time. I'm sitting here with my son, who he'll introduce himself in a moment. And I just wanted to have a conversation around how young people are experiencing Islam, especially growing up in the West. So, do you want to introduce yourself?
Walaikum salam. My name is Sharjeel and I'm studying history and philosophy at the University of York in my final year and in the dissertation struggle just like everyone else at the moment.
Yeah, all the footnotes
all the
and
footnotes
all the sources.
and the researching and all the reading.
Yeah, fantastic. So this is a tough year, isn't it? Lots of reading to do. Yeah. So the reason why I wanted to have this conversation was, and I've always said this at home to you and your brother, that I find that Generation Z are very wise people. You are generally very well informed. Generally, you bring a lot of criticality to how you experience different things around you, but also all of the ideas that reach you. You know, there's a general sense of we're going to critique. We're not just going to accept things. You're quite savvy about how you pick things up from mainstream media. As well, which I learned from. You know, Britain is my adopted home. I'm a first generation immigrant. I came here as a mum with 2 young children, whereas for you, this is home. So you have experienced life differently, and I've learned from you as you've experienced society, and especially through your schooling experiences. You know, your sharing of schooling experiences have been an eye-opener. And now that, mashallah, you're older, you're also becoming more acutely aware of how Islam is experienced in Britain and how Islam is talked about, you know, in our households, but also on the internet. So really just want to say for our audience that I'm interested here in teasing some of these things out, talking to a young person who is, you know, part of Generation Z and see how they've experienced Islam, because I feel that experience is different from how I experienced Islam growing up. I think my Islam tended to be quite laid back. Let's just put it that way. So some of the things, and in fact your brother was sharing some examples, right? So he was saying something about you were on, I think you were listening to the Quran on Spotify, and then somebody policed you about that.
Discord allows you to connect certain apps. It's kind of just to start conversation because you can see what other people are doing.
Yeah.
And I was listening to the Quran because I found that there was a whole playlist which had the whole Quran recitation there from different people reciting it, and it was quite interesting. So I was just listening to it, and I think I was walking to Sainsbury's to get some food or something, and then I get a DM on my app and I open it and there's a guy there.
DM is a direct
message. Yeah, sorry, I might have to explain
the generations.
Yeah, this is very young people talk, but get a direct message from this guy and he's like, "Assalamu alaikum, brother. Just notice you were listening to the Quran and I can't help but notice that that's not in the best intent because you are not fully focused on it." And I replied to him and said, "I'm just walking.
Yeah.
There's no lack of focus, and even if I have the Quran playing in the background whilst I'm studying or cooking, is there a problem? Am I disrespecting it in a certain way?" And the answer is no, because I'm not inherently doing something which is disrespectful or ill-conceived or ill-mannered. I'm just walking. And it kind of pushes this thing which we've seen online, mainly in the last few years, which is an increase of people trying to police how to be Muslim and how to practice your piety.
Right.
And so you see it if you are openly Muslim or outwardly Muslim, should I say, in any way in the online world. Even if you have 1 million good comments, you'll have at least one comment which says you're doing this wrong, or it's someone trying to advise you on how they believe that you should be interacting with the religion. Or practicing the religion. Yeah,
the whole practicing Muslim, because I've talked about the whole practicing Muslim idea in my previous videos as well, where this idea that others will decide if you're a practicing Muslim or not. Whereas in Islamic theology, we leave it to Allah to decide how good we are as Muslims. So there's this idea of this performative piety, which is obvious and it lives in the domain of human beings. So other human beings judge how performative you are as a Muslim, and that seems to be having more and more of a of an emphasis. So rather than Islam being grounded in who we are, in our hearts and souls and minds and our ethics and our decision making being orientated towards it, it's more about how Muslim do you look and how do you sit. And we see this play out in mosques particularly. So I do like going to the mosque because there is something amazing about collective worship. I think it's very energizing. It really revives your faith. But I've had issues where you walk in and you're x-rayed from top to bottom by various women. They're always noticing your appearance. And then once I had an incident where I was just saying my prayer and I didn't realize, but my hair clip just broke. And so my hair just fell out from the back of my scarf, and immediately I was tapped on the shoulder by another woman and she said, "Oh, but your hair is showing." So this kind of policing, I was once told as well about, "Oh, but you're wearing jeans and Allah will not accept your prayer."
I went to, was it London?
It was the East London Mosque, wasn't it? Yeah. Sister, you're wearing jeans, your namaz is not going to be, your prayer is not going to be accepted. So we kind of go into the remit of God and we decide that God is not going to accept your prayers if we can make that decision on behalf of God. So there's quite a lot of that going on. In terms of then what you pick up on the internet, because you are more tapped into social media and what happens on TikTok and various other places, what are the general things that you pick up on the internet?
I think as a overarching statement, I think the internet is the worst form of Islam that there is, and I 100% stand by that opinion. There is, I've talked about the 80-20 rule, and it's interesting because that for some reason doesn't apply on the internet for Islam. You only find the negativity. There is such a small amount of pure positivity that you see online, and even then if you scroll far enough in somebody's feed, you'll find a comment that's just bashing someone for the sake of it.
For the sake of it,
even if they're trying to do something positive. There's a girl online, she's quite well known on TikTok, and she was doing a sisters event. Sisters get together, eat food, it's a safe space, get together, and all the tickets, all the money from the tickets was donated to charity, and it was donated to the Gaza Appeal, which is to rebuild,
help Palestinians.
And the second I opened her comments, what always happens is the most interactive comments come up first with the most likes and the most views on that specific comment, and they were all about what she was wearing. Her hijab isn't right, you can see the front part of her hair, her hands aren't covered, she's not acting in a certain way, she's got makeup on, and I'm sat there thinking she's just raised thousands and thousands of pounds to help people who need it the most in the world, and all you can focus on is how she's dressed and how pious she looks. And the harrowing part about this is this same girl has just started wearing the hijab and deleted all of her old posts. All of them, thousands of posts on every app, Instagram, TikTok and YouTube. She deleted everything, started a new page, and she's getting negativity. Even after she's doing something amazing as a sisters event. How many women out there have you talked to that have set up such an event of this scale,
and raised thousands of pounds,
sold out, a whole venue is booked? How many women have done this?
So she brings all this energy, this compassion, this empathy for the plight of people who are suffering so badly,
and she brings everyone else together by showing a collective, look how good Muslims can be when we get together and we strive for something excellent, and she's getting nothing but negativity. And even the people that were on her videos who were her friends, people would go onto their accounts and say, look how you're dressing, look how you're acting.
It's just terrible, isn't it? It's almost like that we don't look at people's orientation towards justice. What we look at is how they're dressed, and we also don't engage with their actions, all the energy that they bring to do a good deed. And we don't look at their general orientation. We only judge them on their clothes. And I think this rules-based Islam is quite suffocating. I've recorded a video recently where I talked about the hijab, and I gave my opinion, and I said there is no normative statement in the Quran that says hijab is mandatory. And if a woman wants to wear a hijab, wonderful. If she doesn't want to wear a hijab, that's fine, because people have different ways of trying to become closer to God, and women have different ways of becoming closer to God. So a woman who's doing charity, or a woman who's looking after orphan children, or running a charity where she's making arrangements for children to be fostered, a woman who's doing free classes around the Quran. There are a million ways, even how you raise your children, there are a million ways of you being a good Muslim. But somehow the whole measure now of being a good Muslim for women is around whether they wear the hijab and how they dress. And same for men, actually. How outwardly Muslim do you look? And, you know, it's to do with your topi and it's your jubbas and your... And in fact, I was going to share this with our audience because we were in a mosque for our Eid prayer a few months ago. And often when you go to mosques, you will find these signs on the door because mosques run classes for children. And, you know, when children read the Quran, I've taught the Quran to my friends' daughters. You want this to be fun. You want this to be fun. You want them to connect to the Quran, to connect to a loving God, because
like
that is what will inspire them.
Sherry had our Quran classes.
Yeah.
It was an open plan area, teachers at the front, and you just talk to the people next to you, and that's how you do your memorization.
Yeah.
And he encouraged conversation.
Yeah.
And not only that, he encouraged critical thinking.
Yeah.
As much as there was trying to memorize passages and memorize words, there was a critical engagement with the Quran. What do the words mean?
Yes.
And when you talk about it with the people around you, because the people we were sitting next to naturally were guys our age, but even they come from a different background in a different city. So when you're talking, critically engaging with the Quran in a way that is positive and a way that incites knowledge, you learn a lot from that instead of just memorizing page by page by page.
Or just reading it purely in Arabic and not translating. Because I remember on your Quran, and of course with Brother Naveed, I have a podcast on my channel. For our audience here, you can go on my YouTube channel and listen to my podcast with Naveed Idris, who we were very lucky that he also taught my sons in their mid to late teens.
For a good couple of years.
About 3 years, I think you were with him, and he was a brilliant role model. But one of the things he used to do was, and this is where traditionalists would say, oh, you, God forbid, desecrating the Quran. But he would have you take out your pencils. And I remember on the Quran, you would underline words and put the translation in the margins.
Words like alim, stuff like that.
Yeah, you would actually translate.
Kitab. Just basic stuff so you can understand, Allah's talking about the book here. He's talking about the people here. He's using the word knowledge. And interestingly, when he would have us memorize, every week he'd have us memorize 10 words and he'd do a test the next week. But he would have the English, the Arabic, and then the translation. So what does that word mean instead of just what it is? And that was quite an interesting way.
Because it connected you to the Quran. It meant something to you, right? It's meant to inspire your day to day. And I remember he used to also say to you guys in class, I remember talking to him about this. He would say in class, okay, now you've read these 5 verses, relate them to your experience. And I followed that methodology when I was teaching my friends' daughters, is we would read the Quran and we would pause. And actually it took us almost 2 years just to read through Surah Al-Baqarah, which is long and complicated, but it took us that long because we used to pause and say, okay, how can you relate this to your experience in school? How can you relate it to when somebody's being racist towards you? Because in Surah Al-Baqarah, there is this verse, isn't it? Always speak a good word to other people. And I remember the girls were like, oh my God, Sitara auntie, this is really hard. God is setting a very high bar. Yes, he is. Because somebody might be racist towards you, but God is not allowing you to be racist towards them. So you're always meant to speak the good word. So that immediately should inspire your interactions with people around you. So the Quran should speak to us. And I remember he did that connection, right? But if we compare it to the rules-based one, and this is what I had picked up in the mosque.
After the years we spent over there, I think we barely finished Surah Al-Baqarah.
Well, because you're pondering over it.
Pondering over it, and it takes time to learn about it. It's a very dense, there's a lot going on here in the Quran. There's a lot of lessons to be learned. But when you engage with it in that sense, we'd probably do 1 or 2 pages in a week.
That's how
in
I
a
found.
2 to 3 hour session, you'd probably only do a couple of pages.
Which is what tadabbur is. Tadabbur is that pondering over the Quran, reflecting, pausing and thinking, oh, what does that mean for me? How do I apply it in my life? Well, when we were growing up, we were given a very ethics-based understanding of Islam. Now, the ethics-based understanding is do not lie, do not steal, do not cheat in your exams, do not speak rudely to older people, do not speak arrogantly to somebody who is on a lower social status than you, or somebody who's poor, for example, or a beggar even. Because in Pakistan, begging was a problem. We were told never to speak harshly to a beggar. even though there is professional begging happening there, we were not allowed. And we were told that you must always pay the wages of people who work in your house before the sweat dries on their body. That was the extent of the Islam we were taught.
And these are all righteous activities.
And these are all righteous, ethical. Now, if I go back to that poster on the classroom door, it says the adab of the classroom. Now, this is how we've gone from an ethics-based Islam to a rules-based Islam. And because then those rules have to be policed, remember? So you're criticizing children over everything. You make them dislike Islam. So it says, enter the class with the right foot and leave the class with the left. I don't think any of us would ever remember that. And especially if I'm a 6-year-old, 7-year-old skipping and hopping into class, am I going to remember
just
which
happy
foot?
to see my friends.
Happy to see my friends. Make salam when entering and leaving the classroom. Come punctually after visiting the toilet and performing wuzu at home. Sit in a respectful manner without leaning against the wall or resting your arms on the desk. When the teacher is talking, explaining, then listen with full attention. When the teacher is teaching, then follow the lesson with your finger. Come smartly dressed. Now, this is an interesting one. Come smartly dressed in an Islamic uniform. And in brackets, it says either a kurta, which is a tunic, a long tunic, a jubba and topi, a hat for boys, and a jubba and a burqa for girls. Now, this is being badged to 6-year-olds, 8-year-olds, 10-year-olds, 12-year-olds as an Islamic uniform. So there are other rules, by the way. There are 20. I've just read a few. So
this is like, when you used to watch horrible histories and they would reenact Victorian kids where they'd be hit if they spoke out of turn.
Yeah.
Speak when you're spoken to. Sit in a certain way.
Yeah.
And then me and Sherry, actually, on a school trip when we were much younger, we went to I think it was Armley Mills or something.
Yeah.
And we did a lesson as Victorian kids. And they would give us pens and quills, and I was writing the letter A, and the teacher stood above me and said, it's incorrect.
Yeah.
Start again.
Again.
This is exactly what it feels like. You're setting so many rules that A, you're not going to engage, and B, what kid on a Saturday, he's had a full week of school, on a Saturday, is he really going to want to turn up and spend 3 hours at a Quran school now?
Yeah, absolutely. Whereas if you engage them in understanding the Quran and linking it back to the school interactions, oh, my friend was horrible to me and my friend kicked me, am I allowed to kick them back? Things that make the Quran as a living text to them. And the other thing I remember when you and Sharia were younger is that you guys, when you were little, you used to just gravitate towards all of the verses in the Quran which have to do with imagery of the Jannah. So you used to ask things like, would there be a chocolate fountain in Jannah?
Yeah,
do you remember? And, will we get cheese and we'll get orange juice? Will we have Nutella? So, this is what children want to talk about. So they tend to gravitate towards the imagery-based verses in the Quran. Whereas as you get older, you tend to gravitate more towards the rules-based. But the rules-based is really problematic. So all of the rules that we now hear about, art is haram, making pictures is haram, music is haram. Sharia was also giving me this other example where the morality police told him online that it is sinful and haram to play female characters in a video game. So there is that happening as well. There is so much policing in every forum, online or offline, the digital and analog world. In both cases, there's a lot of policing happening.
It started to become a bit of a joke, a trend online. There's this sheikh on TikTok, and his whole channel basically is people will leave a comments asking if certain thing is haram, and he will stitching the videos where the comments at the top of the screen, and he will talk about it. And they're all jokes. They're like, can I eat pork in Minecraft? Because in Minecraft you can kill a pig and then farm the pork from it. They will say things along those lines, and it started to just become a joke. To the point where when someone does ask an intellectual question, people are people are like, oh, somebody's actually asked a decent question with some knowledge coming from it, because it's gotten to the point where people are asking these questions. And I think it's a joke, but I also think there's an element of truth to it. Because if I was to stand in front of the wrong person in a mosque and say, can I, I was talking to my friend and I was eating pork in a video game, they'd come by and they'd tell you that it's wrong. They just would.
They would, yeah. And that's what happens when you go to the mosque as well. You find that you're told about you shouldn't put your foot here or there. somebody would be policing you if you accidentally pick up your glass of water with your left hand.
Sherry was drinking chai with his right hand.
Yeah.
And then he picks up some pizza and then he swaps his hand.
Yeah.
And then he just lifts up the chai because he doesn't want to spill it.
Yeah.
And one of the people at the masjid on the other end said, just wait. Put your chai down with your left hand.
Yes.
Don't pick it up from there.
It up, yeah.
And Sherry and me we looked at each other through our eyes.
Yeah.
A lot was said from looking at each other.
The connection, but that's the thing, isn't it? That you're being watched.
Yeah, all the time.
That social anxiety is that you're being watched all the time. That is the issue. And I think it's making young people, because when I used to teach my friends' daughters as well, they would say, well, what are all the rules for women? Because we're so worried about all the rules, and then we feel guilty. So women in particular carry a lot of guilt around with them, because we feel that we can never be good enough because there's so many rules for them, and it just becomes impossible to follow those rules. And this is where, people extend the remit of God's law and make it very, very difficult. And, that general judginess also puts people off Islam. So I'm hearing more and more that young people are turning away. I mean, this is something I pick up. Young people are turning away from Islam. What's your sense? Are young people turning away from Islam? Is that what you pick up?
I think Harvard had done a study. I think, don't quote me on that. But they were saying that Islam is actually on the rise, but not in young people.
Okay.
Which is interesting. And I think this has had a kind of knee-jerk reaction. I do think a lot of modern day Islamic values aren't really derived from the Quran itself. It's derived from big influencers who follow certain scholars, and the scholar will say something and then the influencer will relay that message.
Right.
Or the influencer will make a decision themselves on X, Y, and Z that they believe is correct. So one of the examples is now they're trying to get young people to move to Arab countries, because that's where the correct version of Islam is being practiced. They won't say go to Pakistan or any other Muslim, because they won't even say go to Singapore or something. They'll say go to an Arab country, because that's where Islam is properly practiced. And that's what I mean when young people are told things like this. It is going to have a negative effect. And I think the rise of Islamophobia, now what we're seeing happening on the Gaza Strip, it's really turning people away, because it kind of feels like we're getting cornered and there's no way out. But in terms of young people, I couldn't really say. I don't know anyone even remotely in my friend group or around me that has left Islam. But Islam's on the rise, but not with young people. I think that's safe to say.
That's safe to say. And I also find, which I've picked up from some women who are working with other Muslim women, that Muslim women in particular, I think, are turning away from Islam. And Muslim women are often accused of looking to the West, or you becoming westernized or secularized. And I often say that if we take the time to systematically develop a framework of feminism in Islam, an Islamic feminism framework, then that would be our inspiration, and people like me are trying to do that. But in the absence of that, of course we look towards the Western tradition, because intellectually it is a more mature tradition. They have done a historical analysis, they've done cultural analysis, they have looked at how patriarchy has affected societies, because patriarchy, remember, is secular. It's a system of power. It affects all religions and non-religions and, systems of thought and how society is structured. The rule of the father. It has nothing to do with religion. It sits outside religion, but it impacts everything. And we're indebted to Western feminists for doing that. But I think what happens is when Muslim women try to make sense of how oppression plays out, and especially how religion can be co-opted into forms of oppression, then they're often accused of being westernized. And I think young people then also come under pressure, especially living in Western countries, that them versus us thing. But we mustn't look Western, or we mustn't talk Western, or we mustn't align ourselves with their values. And I always say, well, what is wrong with universal values like truthfulness or honesty or good citizenship? There is nothing wrong with that, but we still very much have that them versus us. And I think then young people in particular pick up that pressure, don't they? Because you guys are in the middle. You're trying to belong because you live in the society. This is home for you. You want to belong and be integrated here. But then there might be some pull from home saying, oh, but you shouldn't really. And you just get caught in the middle. And I think that those are particular pressure points for Muslim children, but I think more so for young Muslim girls who are trying to just be themselves.
I think women have it 1,000 times harder than men. It's not even.
Yeah.
It's not even close.
Yeah.
The comparison. Women have it way worse. Not only just via criticism, but also the rulings. How many things women must do just to be in an acceptable state of piety. Whereas for men, it's not even close. Men, it's dress well and read your namaz and you've succeeded. And then women, you need to act a certain way, look a certain way, can't wear makeup, speak a certain way, serve your husband, serve your dad, X, Y, Z. It's like this, like rule after rule after rule. For men, it's really easy. Me and Sherry aren't particularly, even the way we look isn't the same way that we have seen some of our friends start to look, where they don't shave their beards, they wear doppies all the time, they only wear a jubba, and they don't wear jeans anymore, stuff like that. We don't even act in a certain way. But
and I don't have an issue with cultural affinity. You know, if jubba or shalwar kameez is your cultural dress, by all means wear it. Many women do, and men do. But the problem is when you make it that Islamic uniform, which is the rules-based thing I was reading out just now, is that you say that this is the Islamic uniform, and so you're doing that because you think that you're being more Islamic.
Yeah, so what they'll do is they'll say, I'm going to read Isha at the mosque, but I'm going to put my jubba on. Yeah. And that's fine. Yeah. But is there a particular reason why you're doing it? It tends to be because it just changes your appearance to look more Muslim, pious.
Yes, yeah.
Or look more Muslim. Yeah. In a sense, because I could go and do namaz and what I'm wearing now and I don't see a problem with that.
No. But then that's where the performative thing comes in.
My beard is, I don't have a long beard. Yeah. That's another thing that you see a lot for men especially. Yeah. I think men, that's the biggest thing for men is the beard.
Is the beard.
Do you shave it, do you not? And there's a lot of conflicting ideas. But the majority of influencers and big people you see online will just have a big beard and they don't keep it intact in any way.
And you mentioned influencers before, and I want to delve into influencers a little bit more because we know
it's a big topic.
It's a big topic. We have these, and I like the term that you guys use, which is podcasting bros. Yeah. So we have a podcasting bro culture, very masculine. And they tend to want to outdo each other in terms of demonstrating to their audience just how submissive their wife is. So some of them will be bragging about, my wife prays in a closet. There's this guy who released a video a few months ago, and it was outrageous really, where his wife was sitting next to him. I think it was Ali Dawa.
It was him, yeah.
Yeah, his wife was sitting next to him and they were commenting about something. And she was in a complete niqab. She had her hands covered. You couldn't see her at all. You could just see her almost like a shadow. So she was sat on the sofa.
And the way that he pointed the camera was kind of
from the back, so you could see her.
She wasn't really fully in frame.
Yeah, but you could still see her. Yeah. And then she was responding to his comments, she wasn't speaking up. So he was demonstrating this point that a woman's voice is also aura and it's sexual and her voice should not be heard. But then he was saying, but my wife wanted to do this. My wife is so submissive and pious. She wanted to do this. This isn't me imposing on her. And she was responding to his questions. And this is very disturbing, by the way. This is a very disturbing video. And then he was posing questions to her and she was responding by using a whiteboard. So she was writing her responses to him.
And then she would hand them
over and he would read them out.
And you know, the thing is, I quite liked him. Because he went from the extreme, he was not exposing or anything, but he's talked about it quite a lot. He used to have a completely different lifestyle. He was not interacting with Islam at all. And then he went to now where he's he's known for how knowledgeable he can be. And I've actually found him quite interesting because he looks through the lens of someone who's lived or experienced both sides. A very Western lifestyle, but and also very Islamic lifestyle. But for him to do something like that, which is a mirror image of what the Taliban passed this week, quite shocking. Yeah, I haven't watched the video since.
They have said that women could not speak in public, and now they've said that women can't even speak to other women in public,
and they must be escorted by a male at all times.
A male relative at
all times.
Yeah, and they have a ministry for virtue and vice as well, don't they? So there's always this.
His name is something Hanafi, and he's the minister of virtue.
Yeah.
And doesn't propagate any virtue of any kind.
No. In fact, for him, oppression is virtue, and this is how twisted some of this thinking has become. But then, where are these values coming from? Because you were saying that rather than people taking their values from the Quran. A lot of them are being influenced, particularly by these podcasting bros. What kind of influencing are they doing? What is their key message? Why is it so attractive to young men? Young and old men.
I think the problem number one is they've done a really good job of demonizing the West. And don't get me wrong, the West has problems. Everywhere in the world has problems. But they say that the West is wrong, and look at all these reasons. Right? They'll say, look at the...
So them versus us.
Them versus us, the LGBTQ propaganda. Look at the divorce rate declines. Look at how people act. Look at the amount of alcohol they're drinking. And they say, look at this, look at that, look at that. And then they try to convince people that you should be different.
Right.
So I've actually seen a video where someone says you should be unapologetically Muslim and look different, so people know that you are Muslim.
So identity has
become a big part of it.
Big parts, very politicized, isn't it?
And it's interesting because when you go to, we've been to foreign countries like Turkey and stuff, everyone just looks like a human being.
Everybody's just dressed the way they want to dress. Dressed.
It's 37 degrees. Yeah. It's so hot.
Yeah.
And everyone is just dressed the way that they are.
Yeah.
But then...
Same in Pakistan.
Because
everybody's dressed casually. Nobody's bothered.
Everyone's got on what they got on.
But I think it becomes more of an issue here, though.
It's a massive issue here. So when they alienate the West, they start saying things like, young kids, you should consider raising your kids in Arab countries, because look how safe they are, and there's no alcohol and things like that.
Yeah.
And they start pulling you away from the country you live in.
Yes.
And they try to pull you away from your family. They say that you should think about yourself first.
Yes.
Pull you away from everything and just focus on your religion and how your life is lived out.
And that's very damaging when you lose those social connections and you isolate people. It's very damaging.
But it's also very damaging when you start hating everything around you. How can you walk out in public and think this post office is selling beer? Look how haram it is. You live in England.
Yes.
They're going to sell beer at the post office.
Yes,
it's your choice not to buy it.
Buy it, exactly.
And and another thing is, it's a very common phrase, which is that being offended is generally a choice. If you choose to be irritated and offended by something that is a you problem.
Yeah.
And I don't know how that affects you being a Muslim in any way. I've lived in this country my entire life. And not once has anyone drinking beer around me made me feel less or more Muslim, or made it feel like it's a threat to how I practice the religion.
Yes. Yeah. But the same with your right to worship.
Yeah.
Like, you can be a Muslim here, you have the freedom to follow your religion. We have mosques, we have thousands of mosques in this country.
There's a mosque on every corner.
There's a mosque on every corner. You have complete freedom of religion, of belief. And we have the Western Academy, which, yes, they will, as we're saying, there are always issues with knowledge traditions as well. And we know there is a movement in universities. You're in a university where they're trying to decolonize the curriculum because the curriculum is very white. We know these movements are happening. But by and large, we have the freedom to be who we are.
Yeah.
And yet, rather than making the most of what's available to us, our learning, being integrated in societies, picking up those good aspects of citizenship, of community. And this is where, for me, integration is good citizenship. Integration is not buying the beer from the post office and then thinking now somehow that this is what the expectation is in terms of integration.
And thinking that is an attack on you.
Oh, that is an attack on you.
Or that's an attack on Islam.
Yeah.
And the best example I can give is my dissertation topic, which is Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang, China, who are literally being persecuted, and they're being sat in a room of 100 people and told that you must denounce your religion, otherwise these things will happen to you. And they still hold steadfast. The Palestinians in Gaza are being massacred, and they stand there and they say, you know what, they're attacking my religion as much as they want, and I will stay firm on that. Whereas here, we are just thinking that everything is an attack on our religion, and we think that the Western world is somehow trying to suppress that. And again, don't get me wrong, there are certain countries. Let's name France as a really good example. Which is,
where they would police how Muslim women dress.
They're policing how Muslim women dress, but at the end of the day, the Muslim women will still choose to be steadfast in their religion. You have
live in that country.
You have to be who you are. You can't let everything stop you from from believing in what you believe in. You know?
Yeah, exactly. But I think that sense of antagonism that some of these podcasters are feeding is that Islam under attack, no, we're not. Our priority, rather than going around saying how superior our religion is, which by the way I don't believe that, in the sense that we shouldn't have supremacist narratives about Islam.
At all.
What we should be doing is creating just societies. If you create more just societies, peaceful societies where women are safe, where children are looked after, where there is rule of law, where there is democracy, Allah says to us, settle your disputes through consultation. Democracy is a form of consultation. We can argue about democracy needing reform and all of that, current forms of democracy needing reform, but democracy is as close to the Quran as it can get. And so if we were to create those just societies, and particularly if we were able to feed our people, eradicate chronic poverty, give people dignity, if we focus on doing that, I think the rest of the world will sit up and pay attention, because we would actually be implementing the justice and compassion oriented principles of Islam and creating better societies.
The world is
rather
now,
than doing that, we're more worried about how we look.
The world is now on a knife's edge.
It is.
So on one side we have all humanitarian beliefs and laws shattering.
Yes.
Because as it turns out, the UN can't do anything
to
stop the very thing it was created for.
Yes.
NATO can't do anything.
Yes. You then have climate change.
You have climate change.
So rampant consumerism, extravagant lifestyles are literally killing this.
There's
only planet
hundreds
that
of
we
millions
have.
chickens killed
Yeah.
every day
Yeah.
for consumerism.
And
yet there's people on the other side of the world who have
nothing.
I think the Palestinians in Gaza are currently eating about 200 calories a day, which is the same as a slice of toast with honey.
That's it.
That's all they've got, and we can't
eating.
send humanitarian aid there, and we can't somehow solve
Or
these
subsistence
problems.
farmers in Pakistan who grow food for everybody, but they're hungry themselves.
Right?
So if we were to look at Islam as an egalitarian religion, a compassionate religion, an emancipatory religion, which wants to uplift the most vulnerable in society and work through principles of justice and humanity, because remember, Islam's framework of humanity is not a racist framework of humanity. In the racist framework of humanity, the white people are at the top of the pyramid. They're more human than the rest of us. This is what we're seeing play out in places like Palestine.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think the important part when you look at humanity from a Quranic point of view is that Allah's given it to achieve the most utility possible, because it's a divine decree. So the problem with the UN is if you are rich enough or powerful enough, you can escape the laws. Whereas with the Quran, this is a divine decree.
Exactly.
So this is law.
This is law.
This is not something you can escape.
Humans are from each other.
There's
diversity. Allah says that there is diversity. I have created you diverse nations and communities. Islam embraces that. And repeatedly it says that even those who are enslaved with you, because remember, slavery existed in that time, they are from among you. So constantly the Quran is saying, but you're all human. You all connect back to Adam and Eve because you came from them. So we can't within the decree, you're right, within the Islamic framework, you cannot create a racist supremacist framework because the theology of the Quran does not allow that. So if Muslims were to focus on that instead, and truly demonstrate to the world how we value humanity. We consider all human beings to be God's worthy creation.
But our examples just don't fit.
But our real examples don't fit that.
When we are served with the perfect opportunity to show the world how great the Quran is, the Taliban is taking away women's voices. And the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is busy lighting up the Burj Khalifa with a Halloween skeleton instead of making any statement on the atrocities
that are happening in Palestine.
They refuse to mention that, but they will happily light up the Burj Khalifa. And then you sat there thinking, we should be moving to an Arab country?
Exactly. Why?
And
our scholars glorifying poverty. So our scholars, when people say, but I'm hungry, I want to hold my government accountable, that it doesn't feed its people, our scholars would say, but this is a test from God. Poverty and hunger are a test from God.
Or they'll say, don't vote.
Or don't vote.
Don't vote.
Don't disengage from democracy. So we have this real issue where we don't use our resources to and align them to the value system that the Quran has given us. the humanity that the Quran, how the Quran defines humanity and human dignity is the best definition that you can come across. How the Quran defines justice is the best definition you come across. And the Quran expects Muslims to remain firm on justice. But that's not what we're doing. We're doing the moral policing of each other. We are doing this rules-based Islam of halal and haram, and the list is this long, nobody can ever. We're telling people that, you know, you can't be creative. We're taking our young people away from the aesthetic growth that happens through music, through art. And yes, fahisha or indecency is haram in Islam. The Quran says that. But the Quran never says that music is haram. So we're taking our children away from that and making them more and more austere and harsh in their thinking. That harsh rules-based Islam is actually taking us away from the very spirit of the Quran. And I do feel, I think your generation, the millennials and your generation, I think have had a very tough time. Because you've had this very difficult to, you've had this form of Islam that demands conformism from you. And that conformism is to scholars' rules and regulations, rather than thinking about how my orientation towards God affects how I deal with fellow human beings. And we really need to up our game on that. And it's sad really that that doesn't happen.
And it's also streamlining us intellectually.
Yeah.
We do the same, our children in this generation are doing the same 5 subjects, and it's streamlining people. Whereas when in the history of mankind did change ever happen through change?
Yeah.
Nothing changes if nothing changes.
That's right.
So if you start streamlining and funneling everyone into physics, chemistry,
it's not even that. It's
stuff.
Medicine,
medicine,
computer science,
law,
accountancy, engineering. So all Muslim children seem to be born with scientific genes, and actually, you know, I used to joke with you about this, that you're doing history and philosophy. So in the Pakistani community, you're actually a failure already because you're studying.
I tend to, whenever we go to the walking groups, with the walking group, I always get that. Oh, really?
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 Why?
It's more like a really instead of a wow. That's
exactly.
Interesting.
It's like really. I was talking to a young Muslim lady, and she's decided to do bachelor's in law, but then has moved to a master's in philosophy. And her parents are saying, "Oh, but philosophy should be a bit of a hobby." And she's like, "It's not a hobby. It's actually an academic discipline." So we discourage our children from going into thinking disciplines, the humanities, so we can understand our own history and our own society better. Then we discourage our children from expressing their creative self, because we forbid to them what Allah has not forbidden. Allah says in Surah Al-Araf, "I've not forbidden the zinat, the beauties that I've created for you." He's not forbidden them, but our ulama are doing that. Now, are there any ulama in the internet podcasting space? Because I know you have very positively talked about Mufti Menk, and you've talked about Omar, Suleiman and others, and what is different about them compared to the other influences?
2 main points. One of them is how positively they explain that Omar Suleiman just brings joy when you listen or watch any of his videos. When he talks about Jannah and the concept of heaven, he tries to make it as realistic as possible, but he talks about it in the most heartwarming, affirming way possible. Whereas other people will say, if you don't do this, this and this, you'll get into heaven. So they set the rules up, whereas Omar Suleiman will say, if you're a good Muslim,
it's a good person,
a righteous person, this is the goal. This is where you'll end up. I've got his book on the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and the book does mention parts about his appearance, because, you know, we want to know. It would be pretty cool to know.
We want to relate to him as a person, right?
You know,
he's a nice.
He'll talk about how he had a smile which is so big that you could see the back of his teeth. He was a very smiley person. But the majority of that book, it's not long. It's a short book, a couple 100 pages. And the majority of it is how he acted and how he was like with people. It mentions his piety, don't get me wrong. He would stand praying in the night, all night. But when he was around kids, he would never lose his temper. Treat them with utmost respect, regardless what they were doing. There was a story about when he was praying, and I think his nephews jumped on his back.
His grandsons
jumped on his back. And instead of berating them, he finishes his namaz, then he just has a quick chat with them. It's my favorite thing about it is when the Prophet would talk to someone.
Yeah.
Let's say I'm talking to someone over here, he would stop, face you.
So physically turn towards
physically
them,
turn you and give
listening.
You all of that attention. Is that not something that as a Muslim should inspire you to be like that? That's something I can be like, right? I can't live as an Arab Bedouin, but I can treat people in such an amazing way. Things like that, I think, are more important than the performative aspect not even a close.
Yeah, well, it's your etiquette,
margin.
isn't it?
It's
It's your akhlaq, it's your adab, it's your ethics, it's how you deal with people. And that's the point I want to emphasize, that as Muslims, we need to be actually scrutinizing how we deal with people. Not scrutinize our clothes all the time, or how many nafal prayer I say, or how pious I look, or how much Arabic I use in my language.
Yeah,
what
the Arabic
my
thing is
accent
starting to
is.
become a big
My
thing.
accent in Arabic.
Yeah.
People have picked up on my accent in Arabic, to which I've had to say, but I'm a woman whose mother tongues are Urdu and Punjabi.
Yeah.
Arabic is not my language, so I will not, and the tajweed I did back in school, I've forgotten now. Because with tajweed, you need to constantly keep practicing, so your pronunciation is perfect. But these are the kind of things we pick on. If we were to just turn away from that and think about how we deal with fellow human beings, because Allah says in the Quran as well that once you finish doing your salat, your prayer, turn to charity. He always says that Aqimus salat, establish your salat, and Aqimus zakat, establish your zakat. Zakat is charity. Charity means that after you have finished connecting with God, your immediate concern should be people.
Yeah.
And that concern should be a charitable concern, a compassionate concern, not a judgmental concern.
Those most fortunate should help those most vulnerable.
More vulnerable. But also, if you are an empathetic and compassionate human being, you're not going to be sitting there judging that girl for her hijab. You would be saying that, mashallah, she's raised tens of thousands of pounds for Palestine.
And what an amazing event.
And what an amazing thing she did.
In an Islamic space where women are extricated and treated awfully and treated as if they're just wrong.
Yeah.
She's bringing them together and saying, look, we can be Muslim in our own way.
Exactly.
And we can be ourselves.
Yeah.
And obviously by proxy doing something amazing, which is, speaking out about Palestine. We've seen people who are losing jobs and things, and especially NFL. I think an NFL star lost his placement and things like that.
Yeah.
And in a world like that, being so outspoken is brave.
It is very brave. So she's
brave.
being incredibly brave and courageous.
Yeah.
And rather than us celebrating that, we are actually judging her. And so when you become a charitable and compassionate person, you step away from the whole, I'm going to scrutinize this person, find flaws in them, to taking on actually the behavior of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam that you just mentioned, the kindness, the compassion. We don't find a single hadith report from him where he points at a woman and says, what you're wearing is wrong and God will judge you. Not a single one. In fact, we always find leniency from him. Women once said to him, we don't have a shawl to come to prayer, when we come to prayer. And he said, just share one.
Yeah.
But he didn't say don't come to prayer. He said just share one.
But that's the difference, is now they'll say.
But now they will say, no, you can't step out of the house. My wife prays in a closet, remember? And if she prays in a closet, that she is more pious.
Again, that podcast.
And again,
this is the worst one,
Yeah.
by the way.
Yeah.
The worst one is when the guy was saying that he was on a walk and there was a sheikh there and he was giving everyone all this advice. And the sheikh said that your wife cannot have pictures of herself on her phone.
Yes.
And she can't send them to you because, and I'm pretty sure this is the example he gave. If you were on a bus and a train, and if I have my phone and I'm looking at it like this, someone behind me will see a picture of my wife, and therefore you've exposed her beauty and you're a failure as a man, right? That's kind of the idea he's giving, and you're sat there thinking, what has that got to do with anything?
No. And that's trivializing and abusing God's teachings. You trivialize them to this level.
And do you not think he's objectifying
of course
women to such an extent that by looking at her face you're doing her disservice?
Yeah.
You're doing her a disservice and you're doing yourself a disservice.
Yeah, that's right. And that
what a toxic way of thinking.
That's a toxic way of thinking, and that toxicity is being, is so damaging to relationships as well, because when you put segregation into that toxicity, what happens is that young men and women don't know how to be around each other.
There's like this animosity.
There's this animosity
between the two. It's like if
this is temptation, this is fitna.
It'll get to a point where you'll see a woman who's very clearly in Muslim attire, and you'll just be like, oh my god. can't even look at her.
Yeah, no.
I've done something wrong.
I've done something wrong. Exactly.
You know,
exactly.
even to look at her so I can walk on the other side of the pavement. You've done
something wrong. Yeah.
Something wrong.
Or the fact that human beings, when they talk to each other, naturally make eye contact.
Yeah,
There's nothing wrong with that. You're actually giving respect to the other person by acknowledging. Imagine when the Prophet is turning towards people. What we now see is that guys do that. And so they're saying to the woman, you are a temptation. I will not even look at you. It is one of the rudest things you can do, by the way, when you talk to somebody. It's something I detest. And this has happened with me a few times, even when I was in Pakistan as well, where guys would just stay at the floor. And I think, is this how bad my influence and presence is, that you can't... And by the way, you see this behavior. You remember I had this racist incident
with
a few weeks ago with the lady.
Yeah.
And the thing that shocked me the most was that she was refusing to look at me. So while she was swearing at me and saying all kinds of really bad things, she wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the ground. She would not lift a gaze up.
In Egyptian era, they wouldn't look at slaves.
Yeah. Well, there you go.
As an example, they wouldn't look at slaves.
Because then you're acknowledging that person's presence and giving them respect.
They weren't even worth...
Yeah.
They weren't worthy enough to be looked at by royals and such. That's the kind of temperament that this is.
But then you have this text literalism, where when Allah says in the Quran in Surah Nur, lower your gaze, what he's saying is be respectful when you look towards people. That's the lowering of the gaze. It's a modest gaze. What do our people do? Because they're literal, they do that. So, now the woman stood on the other side is feeling quite rubbish about herself as a person and feeling guilty, thinking, I have now done something wrong. And just by merely looking at me, this man's faith is going to be diminished.
In the philosophy of language, there is an equation, which is that the overall meaning of a sentence is speaker meaning and sentence meaning. So when I say the wall is white, there is a literal meaning that the wall is white, but I'm also trying to convey something with that. This is where, English language comes in with Shakespeare when he says the sky is blue, and English teachers go crazy about it because they're saying, what's the actual speaker meaning behind the sky is blue? And I think with the Quran, Allah chooses this specific word for a specific reason. But what you can't say is be a literalist about it.
No.
Because it can't be that simple.
No.
It just can't. There's no sentence on earth is that simple. There's always something that you can pull out from that.
Yeah.
And so the philosophy of language adds the two together. It doesn't just say it's the speaker meaning, and it doesn't just say it's the literal meaning of the sentence and what you read. It's both together.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of the point of what you're doing, is trying to merge the two together, and that's where the knowledge comes from.
Yeah.
Because opinions will be derived from anything like that.
And opinions will be affected by our subjectivity. So that's why when you look at the process, the hermeneutical process, when you do interpretation, you always say that the reader is trying to understand the author's intent, which is God in this case, and the reader is engaging with the text. So there is a constant process of engagement happening. That engagement is shaped by who we are as people. So for me, for example, I refuse to read injustice into the Quran. I think that the Quran is an egalitarian text. Now, why is egalitarian? Why do I read it like that? Because egalitarianism is important to me. Right? So my subjectivity comes in, and that's how I engage with the Quran. If somebody wants to read oppression into the Quran, if somebody wants to read racism into the Quran, if somebody wants to read into the Quran that women are a degree inferior than men, they will read it.
The same
because
way
they're bringing their subjectivity
if you're reading the Bible,
yeah,
looking for mistakes,
yes,
you'd find more mistakes than if you weren't doing it. If you were watching a movie and you had the opinion that you already didn't like it, you would criticize every single thing, every single second of it. Yeah. And this is the same thing. If you read or if you approach a text in a certain way, you're going to come out with that same belief.
But people approach the Quran with predetermined ideas and then read those ideas into the Quran.
But what I find so interesting is a lot of these amazing convert stories that you see online are people who absolutely despise the religion. They read the Quran and they have this amazing...
It's always
they see the beauty in it. So it kind of makes me think how negative are the people that are reading injustices into the Quran, because you surely you understand how amazing it is, and you still see negativity in it.
Yeah. Or that the Quran is creating some kind of gender apartheid between men and women. How are you reading that into the Quran? But you're absolutely right that people who converts, when you talk to them about their experiences, they always say how reading the Quran was what had inspired them and they made the decision. And the Quranic language is miraculous then, because of the way the Quran situates its words in its internal context is very powerful. So if, for example, like my thesis was on the idea of usury, and our scholars, our jurists, the fuqaha, have always said that usury is the opposite of sale. Riba is the opposite of sale. Sale is allowed, riba is not allowed. But when you read the Quran and you look at the internal context, in the 4 places this is mentioned, it is always mentioned in the context of charity. Do not be exploiting people who deserve charity. Don't be using loans to exploit people who deserve charity because they're experiencing hardship. So these are loans where you extract wealth from people who are experiencing hardship. So the Quran does something magical. In the verses we're just talking about in Surah Nur, it's talking about lowering your gaze and guiding your private parts. So this is about modest behavior. It's not about literally lowering your gaze. But when you move to a rules-based version of Islam, a version of Islam which is moral policing based, a version of Islam which trivializes what God's words are. It's just trivialization to say you must look at the floor. You're trivializing God's word. You're taking its hikmah, its wisdom away from that.
Allah give you such an unreasonable request? If I'm working at the till in Sainsbury's,
and there's a lady from across you,
and she's like, "Can I have this, this, and this?" And I'm just staring at the till. And then she's trying to hand me money, and I'm like, I can't see you.
Can't see you because you're
where are you?
Yeah.
Like what an unreasonable request.
And why would the Quran request something which would in all cultures be considered rude behavior, a rebuke? The lady who was racist towards me was not looking at me because she did not want to acknowledge me. She did not want to make eye contact.
It's almost like she's disgusted.
It's a form of aggression. You're disgusted.
It's like you're so disgusted by that person.
You're absolutely right. You're so
disgusted. And the
disgusted.
effect that they might have on you.
So the brothers who do that are saying, this is how women are receiving it, that he's so disgusted by me. I'm such a form of evil that he must avert his gaze. And that's what a racist would be doing, is why would they acknowledge me as a person? Why give me humanity? Why even say that I'm going to give this person the basic dignity of engaging in a conversation with them? I'm going to look at the ground and just swear at them, right? So you take that person's presence and their humanity, their dignity,
you're taking
away
the humanity away, exactly. Yeah.
Absolutely. So going back then to people like Mufti Menk and Omar Suleiman, I know you've talked about Omar Suleiman and how he's just amazing in how he inspires kind of that connection with God and our love for Allah and this religion. I think Mufti Menk, although he's traditional, is also quite reasonable in how he approaches some of these really difficult things.
Yeah.
I've not listened to him very much, but a couple of things I have listened from him I found really good. But I know you've listened to him a lot. What do you think about how he's talking, especially to young people? How is he engaging them?
It's been a while, but I think Mufti Menk tries to engage young people through the religion through the lens of a young person. What can a young person do in their current situation to be the best Muslim that they can be, instead of what can a young person be doing to be the best version of themselves if they were many, many years older. So he doesn't say, pray all day. He'll say things like, if you have a class, finish the class and then go and pray, because you don't want to be combative and tell the teacher, I need to leave now and go to my namaz, right? Because especially with schools becoming a lot more strict these days, they really want kids to stay engaged. And instead of being combative, Mufti Menk says, you know what, take a second. Allah isn't going to look at you and say that your prayer is now false or invalid. In fact, he's going, I would assume so. It's actually a better choice as a Muslim to not be combative.
Yes.
And to take the easy route out and say, you know what, I'm going to wait the 20 minutes for this class to end and then do my
And you can remember,
prayer.
delay your prayer. Because Islam allows you to delay your prayer. You can say your prayer later on in the day if you're busy with something, rather than interrupting that class or rather than interrupting 20 other people and asking the teacher to stop while you can put your prayer mat. And I've seen some people, again, it's a performative thing.
You had it in the plane, didn't you?
We had it in the aeroplane. Oh my God.
In the aeroplane. That was
I was coming back from Pakistan.
Yeah.
And there was a group of men from the Tablighi Jamaat. This is the group that goes out and this is the Dawa group basically, who go out of their homes and talk to people about Islam. And these 8 or 10 big burly gentlemen with their big beards and everything, right? They got up, it was Fajr time, and they put their prayer mats in the aisle between the seats, and they started to pray. Now there were 2 air steward, I think that you call them stewardesses now. They were stood on both ends, and bless them, they were saying, excuse me sir, and of course what they're doing is they're taking their sweet time. They did their 2 sunnah, they did their 2 farz, they did their nafal, and it was shocking behavior. And I'm like, what are you trying to prove here? These women are trying to do their work. You've literally blocked the passage.
If there was someone who had eaten peanut spikes and was going into anaphylactic shock on the other end,
and they needed an EpiPen, would you get up? And this is the behavior. I don't get it. I know of people who want university seminars to stop so they can put their prayer mat down and say their prayer and then resume. But what they don't realize is that you're actually losing 20 minutes or 15 minutes of teaching time for the 15 or 20 or 40 other people who sat in that room. Just delay your prayer. Do it qaza.
I think the problem is the respect, though, here. Is the respect. There's no respect for the people.
Yeah.
And so you put yourself above
them. But you
them.
expect society to give you respect. So you expect society to make an adjustment for you, but you're not willing to use the adjustment that Allah's already given you. Which is, if you can't do your Zuhr prayer or your Asr prayer or your Maghrib prayer, just wait. Do it later. Do it at home. Do it and go to the prayer room in the university once you finish a seminar. But don't interrupt that seminar. And I think this creates a very strange sense of friction about, and I think that Muslims like that do bring a sense of entitlement with them, which they really need to reflect on. I don't think that's great behavior at all.
There's a viral video of there was an Uber driver who was Muslim, and he had this young guy in the back, and he turns around to him and says, hey, listen, I need to pray and our journey's another 30 minutes. Is it okay if I just take 5 minutes? I've got my prayer mat in the back and I just go and pray. And the guy in the back says, you know what? I don't have anywhere to be, and that's fine. So he takes that time to ask his passenger and respect him and say, is it okay if I do this? And the guy videoed him praying and said, this is incredible and I respect this, the level of effort that he puts in for his religion.
Yeah.
And that the reason why that video was received so well is because the Uber driver was respectful to his passenger, and he respected his time. If those guys had said to the air stewardesses, hey, listen, we need to pray.
Yeah.
Right.
We just need 5 minutes.
I need 5 minutes. Can I do
Am I interrupting something here?
If you say, can I do it right at the back of the plane or something, or again, you can do it in your seat.
You can do it in your seat.
Right.
Why stop?
You know, why stand up and be in the
middle? A mum
stood
there with a young child, and the child immediately needs the toilet. She's just stood there.
Yeah.
And by the way, they blocked both aisles, not just one.
Yeah, it's just ridiculous.
So they didn't just block one where I was sat in the corner. They actually blocked, because there was a group of 5 or 6 in front of me. They used one aisle, another group of 5 or 6, and this is seen again as an act of piety, and it is an obvious performative act of piety rather than consideration for people around you.
Yeah.
And I would argue that consideration is more important. So that compassionate, this is where we started our conversation, was that ethics-based, compassionate, caring version of Islam is actually a stronger, more grounded version of Islam, rather than this them versus us distinctiveness. We look different, we talk different, we act superior, we're the holders of truth and you're not.
When you go for Friday prayer and there's people parking in other people's spots or outside their houses and not letting them get out. I mean,
you had this incident with a nurse, poor thing, coming back from her late shift, and she couldn't get into her house.
She'd actually reported it to the mosque itself.
Yeah.
She'd come back from I think it was a night shift.
It was a night shift, and I think you guys, we were probably there for Tarawih or maybe late.
It was Tarawih, it was
quite late at night.
Tarawih, because everyone would go for Tarawih, and it would be, I think this was actually one of the Fridays, and Fridays are always busy for Tarawih. And everyone had parked up along the street, and this person actually parked outside of where she would normally park. And given that she's coming back very late at night. She would expect that my space is open, but somebody's parked there.
Yeah.
And so, of course, she puts a complaint in.
Of course she does.
And you can just feel this disdain in the room.
Yeah.
Where people are like, oh, but I need to pray.
Exactly.
You can feel it in the air.
But you're letting a mum, you're stopping her from going into her home after an 8-hour shift at a hospital.
I don't care what her job is.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter.
No.
Her life is not worth less than yours.
Exactly.
She could be doing the most vile things. If she needs to park a car outside her house, she has to park a car.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that lack of consideration we see again and again through our daily behavior, but also on the internet, where we're just busy doing moral policing rather than noticing how people are actually what good things they're doing in their lives. So I know we've had a long conversation here. It's been a great conversation, but I just want to loop back a little bit to some of kind of the key messages and takeaways from you in terms of how you experience Islam, and how comfortable do you feel comfortable then being a Muslim in your sense of self, and what do you think, if you are comfortable, where does that sense of confidence and comfort come from, and how do you then step away from all of the social anxiety that's coming your way, where people are judging you for not being a good enough Muslim? Kind of what keeps you going? It keeps you connected to the religion.
Well, I think it's actually the same problems we've talked about today. So one is I'm not performative. So when people look at me, they don't think of me as a certain way, right? Which is both a good and a bad thing, some people would say. But I would say people treat me the same. So there's no lack of confidence. But then again, it all comes from your firm beliefs. I've lived in university halls where people are drinking, and I have said no, and there is always that awkward thing where it's like, oh, why? And then I'm like, yeah, I'm Muslim and we don't drink. That always happens. But if you're firm in what you believe, I don't see why this is a problem.
Yeah.
Right? I'm living in a different country with a different culture. People are going to drink and whatnot.
Yeah.
And I think as a young person, the same problems that we've talked about stem from the same issues in terms of how you fight them. So being ethically sound is going to solve the problem of being combative.
Yeah.
Because you're not going to be combative when you understand the ethics behind that.
Yeah.
You're not going to argue with people about a certain culture or topic of their culture because you're not trying to perform your life in a certain way.
Yeah. Or make them feel bad.
So
you could say that people saying, well, I don't drink, and then feel quite superior, and then say, but you drink, and therefore I'm going to judge you. And I've seen people behave that way, whereas what you want from the other party is to accommodate your beliefs, which they do.
They do. This is the thing. We live in a country with some of the most respectful people on the planet. You know, and the thing is, I've sat in the room whilst my friends are drinking, and just for 5 minutes, just having a bit of a chat, because if I say, no, it's my time to leave, they're going to feel bad.
You're making it obvious.
You're making it obvious, and you're making them feel like, oh, I can't be drinking, and they paid the rent for this. You know what I mean? They paid the rent as well. I can't stand there and say I'm policing how you live.
Yes.
And we all together made a rule of we're not going to get drunk in the house because that's going to disrespect the house. You can break stuff. So we made that rule together.
Yeah.
Right? They accommodated for everyone. So I should be accommodating and not get up and say, guys, you're drinking, I can't do this, I have to leave now. I just sit there, just have a bit of a laugh and then say, you know what, it's time for me to go. I need to study or whatever.
Yeah. And it's more relaxed for everybody.
Yeah.
You don't feel pressured.
And I don't create that friction with the people that I live with. And I'm not arguing with them for the sake of arguing. I'm just getting on with my life. And
but also being true to your values.
Yeah.
So, nobody's asking you to compromise on your values. You're still being true to your values.
Because those values don't
need to be rubbed into other people's faces.
Yeah, when you explain to them that you don't drink, they're not going to try to make you drink.
No.
It has happened with people who are particularly... I'm just going to say strange. When they're particularly strange in a sense, they do say, oh, why don't you just have a sip?
Yeah.
But then if you're firm, you just say, no, I can't have a sip.
Yeah.
And it's that simple.
That's simple, yeah. It doesn't have to be combative.
Yeah, especially when it comes to any temptation. You just say no.
You just say no.
It's your choice to say no.
Exactly. And I think perhaps that's the note that we will end on, is that for me, the whole gist of this conversation is that I think young people, if they're given a ethics-based understanding of Islam, they can be themselves, they can be who they are, they can still be the individuals who they are, be their creative selves, live a normal life, not a life where they're expected to conform to these ridiculous standards of performative piety, which actually alienate them from Islam, to be honest. And rather just be yourself.
And alienates them in a country where they are a minority.
They are a minority.
You are a minority, and you pull yourself away from the only people. That
well,
you have
to be
something
your friends,
in
your school friends and everybody, exactly. And so parents then create these terrible expectations for their children, and they feel trapped and caught out because they can't belong here and they can't quite belong in the other world either. So they're stuck in the middle, feeling really anxious. Whereas I think a compassionate, ethics-based version of Islam, which is respectful towards people around us, gives people the same dignity that we demand for ourselves in terms of our interactions with them. And in the end, I think Shuja also an intellectually informed understanding of Islam, not just the halal haram, I've said this, or alim so and so have said this, therefore you must follow. No, a critically informed understanding of Islam means that you can actually live out those Islamic principles in a much better way and still feel that you belong in that society, because I think that sense of belonging for young Muslims is so important, especially those who are living in the West.
I think you hit the nail on the head. There's a sense of belonging. Because you're not quite like everyone else. And then you're being told
to be more different.
To be more different, and to also treat them
differently,
or look at them in a different sense, in a more negative,
combative, from a sense of superiority, which people, by the way, pick up. Humans have really good antennae. They have really good radar. They know that this is how Muslims are going to talk about them. So I think if you were to dial down on that sense of, I would say, quite arrogant ways of dealing with people, dial it down, be our humble selves, be more grounded in our religious tradition, be more grounded in the uswa, in the example of Prophet
you
Muhammad.
You have to be confident in the Quran, confident in your beliefs, confident in what your parents have told you. If you're confident in what you believe truly and completely, I know for a fact when I went into university I was so apprehensive. What's the drinking going to be like? What's it going to be like? And I sent a message to the university and said, I'm a Muslim, can you put me in a group where other people have requested not to drink? And they did.
They accommodated you.
They accommodated me. So they put me in a group where only a couple people drank in the flat. It was 6 people. Only a couple people drank. And they accommodated. But at the end of the day, when I did have a conversation, one of their friends that may have come over and said, do you want to come out clubbing with us? And I remained firm and I just said no. But again, if they ask you, that's your test.
That's it.
Just drill it into your head. That's your test, and that's your chance to say no.
But kindly,
of
We
course.
can always say thank you for inviting me, but it's not.
Like when he wanted to watch the Euros, we said, you know what, I would love to go and watch it in a pub, but I'm not comfortable in that space. You guys have fun, and I'm sure you will. And then everyone left and they came back and they were all happy and there was no problems.
No.
Everyone's just sat there, in fact, they say sorry for asking. And I say, you don't need to be.
Exactly.
People are eating in front of me whilst I'm fasting.
I know, and they always apologise.
They always apologise, and I have to tell them again and again, do not accommodate for me. You live your life and I will live my life.
Yes.
I'm not going to eat and you can, do whatever.
Yeah.
Don't feel shame about that.
Exactly.
The same way that we shouldn't feel shameful for living a certain lifestyle.
Exactly. And just be comfortable in our skins. Well, I think this has been a really good conversation. And I hope that for our audience as well, we've just sat on a sofa and had a conversation as we would do in our home. But it would hopefully give really good insight because of some of the challenges that parents often feel quite apprehensive and fearful. And I often get questions from them about, raising children in the West. And I always say, if you're connected to the Quran, if you're connected to the Sunnah of the Prophet, if you're living out the ethics of the Quran, and this is what you're teaching to your children, let them engage with it intellectually as well. Let them build that connection to God. And that would help them feel quite comfortable and relaxed as Muslims. We don't have to put up a fight over everything. We don't have to turn everything into an antagonistic argument where we prove the superiority of Islam. We can actually just be part of the communities that we're here and try to do good.
Yes, I think if we consider focusing on ethics and making your children comfortable in being Muslim instead of worried at how others will affect their Islam. So instead of trying to making your kids feel like you're Muslim and people are out to get you. You
the
need to make them
complex.
The victim complex.
Yeah,
make them confident in their beliefs. If they're confident in their beliefs, they'll go miles and they won't be worrying about other people think and say and do.
Yeah.
They'll just be focusing on themselves and how they can act in a righteous way.
Exactly.
And I think if you focus on those two things, there's not much else to it.
No.
There's going to be challenges in every country that you live in, and the societies and the communities. But if you can focus on those two things, I think that will help.
Yeah, and just never develop that sense of victimhood, especially in response to Islamophobia. Islamophobia is a form of hatred. Yeah. People are going to hate others, are going to always hate others. They're going to find excuses and reasons for hating others. I don't think that we should, as a result of that, feel under siege. Yeah. In fact, we should be very grounded in our own ethical tradition and knowledge tradition, and make our children informed Muslims. So if they do get Islamophobic interactions, they're able to very calmly, but in a very educated and informed way, respond to them. And I think that's when we can, as parents, raise children who are very comfortable living in the diaspora in the West, just as they would be comfortable living back in their home countries. I mean, I grew up in a Muslim majority country. I was not given a combative, judgmental understanding of Islam. I was given an ethics-based understanding of Islam, and that served me really well. So I think that as a community, we need to just stop feeling under siege all the time and really focus on our energies on that citizenship and being, grounded members of our communities, of our wider community, Muslim, non-Muslim, Christian, no religion, doesn't matter, but to deal with people on the shared humanity that we have, give them the same dignity as human beings as we would expect for ourselves. And I think that shared humanity, I always say here that we often talk about the internet is so divisive and polarizing, and people talk about differences, but actually just sit with somebody, have a cup of coffee and break bread with them, and you will find that you have more in common with people.
I think Gen Z does as well, because Gen Z doesn't see race and colour and all that stuff, right?
Yeah.
When you rip our skin off, we're all the same.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
We're all human beings.
Bones and muscle.
Yeah.
We're all human beings.
Yeah.
Right.
And our soul and our spirit, and that's
we can't sit there thinking, this person is different than me.
Yeah.
The more you think people are different, the more you're just going to be feeling like someone's watching you.
Exactly.
All the time, and that's where the insecurities come out. We've seen this with certain people in our around us in our family.
Yeah.
They get those insecurities because they think I don't look like this and I don't act like this.
Yeah. Just be comfortable in your skin. And
just be yourself.
Be a good person.
Be yourself and be Muslim.
And be a good
person.
Right.
That's all it is.
Yeah. Yeah, lovely. Well, I hope that you've all that you enjoyed this conversation. I hope this conversation has been insightful for you as well, especially if you're a parent raising children here in the West, or you're a young person growing up in the West and you have your experience of Islam. And I would really welcome your comments as well on this video about your experiences of Islam, and Sharjeel and I can always come back and pick up some of those topics and any concerns that you have or any anxieties that you have. So thank you very much for bearing with us, for listening to us, and inshallah we will try to do some of this a bit more, do a few more of these conversations. So thank you very much. I really appreciate your time. I know how much reading you have to do this week. So thank you very much, everyone. Assalamu alaikum.